So we have the enviable position of trying to give you some guidance in one of the messiest economic years we've had in a while, and that's saying something, and do it in about 25 minutes. So that's where we're heading right now. And to do that and to start that, we always start by telling you how have we done? How have we historically handled our predictions for West Michigan? So this is a complicated graph, but it's relatively simple. What we do is we predict what employment is going to be the next January, every January. So it's a year out. And what this graph does is it takes what we predicted and it subtracts what actually happened. So if it's 0, it means we were exactly right. The black and the orange bars are the accuracy with which the US government can count the number of employed people. So if we're between those two numbers, we're statistically correct. So you can see over the span of time where we've been working on this as the primary, the only year I got what was going to happen the following January wrong was in 2020. And I had a lot of good company that year as COVID fully wasn't realized in January. This last year, we also did very well on prices. And so if you look at this, the Federal Reserve was predicting about 4.5% inflation. We were predicting about 6.5% inflation, and it came in at 6.5%. So sometimes it's good to be lucky, but we certainly were seeing much more inflation than most were seeing at the time. So if you were following us, you did a little bit better in your planning for this last year. So the story for this year is very, very simple. The pandemic stimulus fading, combined with higher interest rates, will place a drag on the economy and slow things down, all right? And to talk that through, we're going to walk you through 3 things. The first thing we're going to walk you through is how that drag is actually affecting our economy right now. We're then going to walk through how that's going to affect your prices for this coming year. And then we're going to spend time telling you what's different about West Michigan, because the story here in West Michigan is different than the story for the US as a whole. So to do this, we'll start with Kahila Day, and you can go.
Thank you, Professor Isely. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us here today morning. The past year, 2022, was a year of policy correction as well as self-correction within the economy to restore demand and supply equilibrium in the goods market and the labor market. The Federal Reserve made intentional, concerted efforts to bring down inflation, albeit at the cost of an economic slowdown. We do expect going forward in 2023 for the real economy to slow down and we have to tolerate some level of economic slowdown and unemployment and high unemployment rates to bring down inflation. Primarily for 2 reasons. The Federal Reserve's restrictive monetary policy response to curb the elevated inflationary pressures. And secondly, the gradual reduction in the excess accumulated savings that primarily came from the fiscal stimulus distributed during the pandemic. So I'm going to first talk about the monetary policy response. Federal Reserve's monetary policy actions are guided by its dual mandate of full employment and price stability. By full employment, we mean the real GDP growth at its potential, which is consistent with the natural rate of unemployment of about 4.2% in the economy. And by price stability, we mean inflation and inflationary expectations well anchored at 2%. We were way out of line last year. So the Federal Reserve increased interest rates by 450 basis points in one single year to bring down inflation, yet inflation turned out to be fairly sticky, and we were at 6.5% in December 2022. We do expect ongoing increases in the federal funds rate this year by about 50 to 100 basis points to bring down inflation to more acceptable levels. Now, this will, of course, increase the cost of borrowing in terms of the mortgage interest rates and the prime lending rates to about 7 to 8%. And the increase in interest rates is likely to restrain economic activity in interest-sensitive sectors, such as the housing market, especially at the national level. The second factor which to our understanding is going to have a drag on the economy, is this gradual fading away of the fiscal stimulus checks during the pandemic, distributed during the pandemic. The federal government distributed about $5 trillion of money into the economy, liquidity into the economy, which is 20% of the US GDP. And that, coupled with the lockdowns, is causing that spike, caused that spike that you're seeing on the chart. And the personal savings for the average American households increased. Now, a lot of that money has been spent by the low-income households, the middle-income households, primarily the credit-constrained households. And we expect consumption growth to slow down in the second half of 2023, mainly due to the tighter financial conditions and a decline in the real disposable income. We are seeing consumer stress right now, indicated by the rollover of credit card debts and substitution by consumers towards less expensive alternatives in goods and services. Consumption is about 66% of the US GDP. So we have started to see the drag on the economy. As you can see, the blue line is the real GDP growth, which has started to go down below the potential. The orange line is the potential GDP growth of 2%. So the real GDP growth has started to go below the potential GDP growth. This does not, however, yet imply a recession. All this implies is that the real GDP in the United States is growing at a slower rate. The National Bureau of Economic Research defines recession as negative GDP growth rates for 2 consecutive quarters. Right now, what we're seeing is a slowdown in the US economy, and we're likely to see that pretty much throughout 2023. We do expect a milder recession in the second half of 2023. What do these developments and factors mean for price and wage pressures for the US compared to the West Michigan is the next thing that I want to talk about. So at the national level, the Federal Reserve and the University of Michigan Inflation Expectations Survey projects inflation to be at 5%. Now, according to the Grand Rapids Survey of Business Leaders in Grand Rapids expect inflation to be higher than the national average, which is about 7%. That's not surprising because, as Professor Isely will talk about this later, the Grand Rapids economy seems to be rather resilient to much of the recessionary pressures and is likely to outperform the national economy. We, at our end, also estimated a time series econometric model, which is called a factor-augmented vector autoregression model. We include information from about 120 macroeconomic indicators covering industrial production, labor market, the trade, external economy of the US, price indicators, monetary policy indicators, and our forecasts suggest that inflation will be at 5% for this coming year in 2020, for this year in 2023. Much of the inflation in Grand Rapids, the 7% inflation is being contributed by the services sector, primarily restaurants, finance, healthcare, media. Now, the regional and national level both tell us a similar story, that this year inflation is not going to disappear. Prices will increase, but it's going to increase at a decreasing rate. So we will see smaller numbers for inflation compared to last year, primarily reflecting demand-supply imbalances in goods market and the labor market. Now, the Federal Reserve can bring down the demand. The Federal Reserve does not have much control over the supply side constraints. We are seeing supply chain pressure easing out and unwinding slowly. It has not bounced back to pre-pandemic levels, but it is easing out slowly. And of course, there are exogenous shocks like the Russia-Ukraine war that is also putting upward pressure on energy and goods sector prices. So this is more structural, supply-side constraints and factors, and it's going to take time for the supply side to, come back to some level of normalcy so that the demand and supply balance. But the Federal Reserve is making concerted efforts to bring down the demand so as to bring down the price pressure. The next important concern, and perhaps a bigger contributing factor to inflation, is wage inflation. This chart here shows the wage inflation that business leaders in Grand Rapids expect this year. So business leaders in Grand Rapids expect wage inflation to be at 4.5%, again, primarily contributed by restaurants here and wholesale and retail. The Federal Reserve forecast as well as our forecasts are aligned with the Grand Rapids expectations that wage inflation is going to be at 4.5% this year. Labor market continues to be tight. Labor demand, indicated by the unemployment rate, is at its historic low, 3.5%, well below the natural rate of 4.2. Labor supply, indicated by the labor force participation, is still weak and it's not bounced back to pre-pandemic levels. You know, this demand-supply imbalance in the labor market is causing upward pressure and leading to nominal wage growth. There are about 3.5 million less workers today compared to pre-pandemic levels due to retirement, cost of childcare, transportation costs. And again, this is a more long-term phenomenon. It's going to take time for the labor market to come back to balance. To sum up, the Federal Reserve is trying its best to bring down the inflation, and that's important because longer bouts of inflation will make inflationary expectations more entrenched, and that will lead to further inflation. So it's going to be harder to bring down inflation otherwise. So we expect the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates by 50 to 100 basis points, though more moderately, for a soft landing this year of the economy. And but interestingly, the Grand Rapids economy is rather resilient to much of these recessionary pressures. Employment in Grand Rapids has already bounced back to pre-pandemic levels. Housing market is going strong. And the question is why? So Professor Isely will discuss some of the factors. Why will the Grand Rapids economy outperform?
Yeah. So as we look at this, we're looking at a United States where wages are going up slower than prices. They're going to do that again this year. We're seeing savings erode away. We're seeing interest rates go up. All of that's leading us to really look at that recessionary pressure across the United States. Here in West Michigan, we have a few secret weapons that are going to make things better. And so I'm going to give you the punchline first, all right? I want you to walk away with this. Right now, what we're seeing is the Grand Rapids area is going to grow at twice the rate of the U.S. economy this year, all right? We're not going to see the same slowdown, and if we follow that path, we actually will avoid a recession here, okay? So that's the punchline. What's the first reason? The first reason is demographics. As Rick stated at the beginning, we're growing in this area. We have more people. But not only do we have more people, we have the right kind of people for growth. All right? So this is comparing the people in their 30s, the number of people in their 30s, to the number of people over 65. And you can see here in Kent County, we have a greater percentage of our population in their 30s. Why do we choose 30s? Because it avoids the ups and downs of college populations. So in fact, even compared to Washtenaw County, where the majority of the economy is driven by U of M, we have a better ratio than they do, okay? This is a big deal. You see Ottawa County, Wayne County, Michigan, the United States, all have the reverse ratio. You want a growing economy, you bring in young people. That's what we have. And the young people are convincing other young people to come, so we have net migration in. All of this leads to the ability for your companies to try and grow as fast as you say you want to grow. And that's going to take a lot of additional workers. All right? The second reason is automotive. If we look at the different types of industries across West Michigan, aircraft, auto, we're growing battery and furniture, you can see Kent County got a much larger exposure. It's much larger to automotive. Often that leads us to feel a cycle more. But what we have this year is a lot of pent-up demand on the automotive side, all right? And what that means is even though The number of units sold this year are going to be small compared to before the pandemic. It's going to be a lot more units than last year. So this is one area of manufacturing where we see growth year over year, and there's going to be good strength in that sector. All right? And the third reason is all of those young people have put pressure on housing. So you heard Rick give the teaser for their study, which said they were 35,000 units short. What we can see is if we compare ourselves to the US economy, starting in the middle of the year when interest rates really started to bite, we started to see housing starts in the United States drop. So fewer and fewer units were being built because there were fewer and fewer people willing to buy them because their prices were going up and the interest rates were going up. Here in West Michigan, something different happened. The number of new units accelerated as the interest rate started. In fact, we saw a slow stop in residential construction in late summer, and it lasted about 2 weeks. And then they looked at it and said, no, we better keep building. Why? Because we have so many gosh darn young people, and they want houses. That's a really good thing. If anything, our issue is that we have an asymmetry between our multifamily and our single-family housing. All right? Here's an interesting tidbit for you. Dr. Lado Agura, who works at Grand Valley as well, did some studies and found that here in West Michigan, we're still seeing the price of houses go up. You're like, wait a minute, the median price is dropping. Yep, interest rates went up, people still wanted a house, so they went down a size. And that smaller house that they're buying is costing them more than it did last year. All right? This is really indicative of very strong demand that's not going to go away as we move forward. All right? So you need to understand that. And because we don't have enough single family, we have individuals and families trapped in multifamily. And what we're seeing there is that they're laddering up. They can't find a house, but they want to be in a better place. So they get into a newer split, or they go from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. We're seeing that happen. That's not happening in the rest of the U.S. It's not. We're seeing prices drop. We're seeing rents drop. They'll do that here, but nowhere near what we're seeing in the rest of the United States. That's going to hold up value and make it easy to invest as we go forward. Okay? So, what have we done? We've walked through the economy is slowing down because interest rates are higher and people have less savings. Prices are going up, and they're going to keep going up because wages are going to continue to push them from behind. All right? It doesn't matter what the Federal Reserve does when corporations have already baked in 4.5% wage increases for this coming year. All right? You're going to have more inflation than you used to. It's going to be less at the end of the year than it is now. All right? And third, we know West Michigan is going to outperform because of the mix of things that we have here. But most importantly, our ability to draw in young people. All right? So, where's our summary? What we're seeing right now, our businesses are slightly more pessimistic about the coming year than they were last year. They watch the news. All right? But if we look at sales growth and employment growth, what you can see is that businesses here are really looking at double the growth that the rest of the United States is. That's a big deal. And that's going to keep your businesses humming along. All right? Wage inflation, we see consistent with the rest of the U.S. And right now here in Kent County, there's an over-expectation for inflation. My guess is that for once the business leaders may actually be wrong on this. Normally when I bet against them, I'm wrong. But I think this year they'll be a little wrong because I think the economy U.S.-wide is slowing down, and it's slowing down faster than they know because it's not slowing down here. All right? And that's going to bring down prices around us, even if the prices here for things like restaurants need to double. All right? Good luck finding a cook. All right? If you can find one, chances are 4 other people are also bidding on them. This is a big deal for us, and you should be excited about that for West Michigan and Kent County. All right? So here's the things that will make us wrong. All right? We have to tell you what will make us wrong because it's a really complicated year. And if any of these things go awry, it's going to make us wrong. Number 1, consumer spending. We expect to see that consumer spending drop in a pretty straight manner through the first half of the year. If it drops faster than that, we will see less prices and a slower economy. All right? If it drops slower than that, it'll speed up. Right now, there's some indications it may be dropping faster than we initially indicated. So right now, I'm seeing our risk, the higher risk on our forecast, on that prices might be lower and that growth may be lower than what we originally forecast here. So realize that that's the bias on what we think might happen. Second, the Federal Reserve. Anybody hear what they did today? You'll hear later. All right? If you did and you can tell me, then we know that there's been a leak. All right? We expect them to continue to increase as the first half happens here. They're going to do that because they have to get rid of those inflation expectations. So has anybody out there said or heard somebody say, you need to buy that now because it's going to go up in price? Anybody hear that? Yeah, and we have a lot of shy people here unwilling to raise their hand. They're like, you can't see me. This is a big deal. That inflation expectation makes inflation be sticky and harder to get rid of. It's how they sold used cars in the 70s. You better buy this baby today. It's going up in price next month. All right? So inflation expectations are important. If they remain sticky, you're going to see inflation stay harder than what we expected. We expect that these inflation expectations will be wrung out by the Federal Reserve as we get to the second half of this year. Supply disruptions, we're seeing that improve. What we don't know is as China comes back alive from their COVID restrictions of the last year, how that will affect the supply chain across the Pacific. And we're not quite sure how the supply chains will be disrupted by the fact that everybody wants to get out of China. So they're building in India, in Taiwan, in Vietnam, and in Michigan, trying to get their production capabilities out of there. That's going to disrupt the supply chain a little bit and is going to increase costs. But that's probably a longer-term effect. All right? We did inflation expectations. We have a couple other shocks. Normally, I don't care about the government because the government really doesn't have a big effect on the economy. All of you do, and all of your customers do. All right? But we do have a budget showdown that's happening. Budget showdowns cause us 2 problems. They create uncertainty. Uncertainty results in people not investing. And we're most concerned about people in other countries. All of you have benefited from lower interest rates over the course of the last 30 years because everybody in the rest of the world says, if I want my money safe, I'm going to save it in the United States, and it drives down our interest rates. If we start changing their mind on this, we're going to feel those interest rates go up, okay? And we're worried about the mid-year fake. What do I mean by the mid-year fake? Does anybody remember going to the pump in June of last year and paying $5? Anybody? Or have you blocked that out now? All right. In the middle of the year, we're going to be comparing $5 gasoline to $3.50 gasoline. And it's going to take a full percentage point off of the year-to-year inflation rate in the middle of the year. But by the end of the year, that goes away. So what's going to happen is that it's going to put downward pressure in the middle of the year and upward pressure at the end of the year. So it's going to create this feeling of a fake. There's a second reason we have a fake. Did anybody hear things about, did anybody get some really good deals at the end of the holidays because there was so much overstock in big box retailers? Anybody do that? Yeah. We just don't have shoppers out here, huh? What we had was distrust in the supply chain led to retailers overstocking this year. And it led to big sales in December. And so you saw lots of celebrations about how prices went down in December. Guess what? Retailers learn from their mistakes. And they are not going to overorder again. And so those sales won't keep that downward pressure. So we need to be watching for a fake on inflation. I think you're going to hear a lot of exuberance as we get into the spring about, see, the Federal Reserve has gotten rid of inflation, and then it will creep back in the fall, okay? And so you need to be careful about that, all right? So pay attention. We've told you what we think is going to happen. We've told you why we think it's going to happen, and we've told you the things to watch for that will tell you that things are deviating from what we're saying right now in January. So go forward and make good business decisions and have a good year. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.